everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our latest episode of IMDD Talks. Today, we're going to be discussing the importance of advocacy with individualized education plans or IEPs. And I have the pleasure today of being joined by Jackie and Justin Martin. Hello, thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, great to be here.
Hi, thank you for having us.
Do both of you want to take a second to just give a very brief introduction about the two of you and what your priorities are?
Sure, absolutely. So I'm Justin Martin. I am currently what's known as a pre-service teacher. So I'm about a month-ish away from getting my license to teach 7th to 12th grade English. In addition to that, I have a disability. I have cerebral palsy. I use a wheelchair. So a lot of my work is, figuring out how those two things rub together, how to make a more equitable space for disabled learners, for people that have, kind of been underserved by our current education system. And I get to talk about books all day, so it's great.
Love talking about books. Jackie,
Yeah.
why don't you introduce yourself real quick?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Jackie Martin. I'm Justin's mom. I have been involved with advocacy for people with disabilities 25 years, I'm going to say, the majority of Justin's life, and in different capacities. Years ago, I worked for the Cerebral Palsy Association of Ohio, and through a grant from the DD Council, actually. I was also a member of the Family Support Board years ago through Disability Rights Ohio. And I currently am the grants coordinator at the Adult Advocacy Centers, which is a nonprofit organization, statewide agency that works within the disability field, criminal justice, field and victim services. And our mission is to support access and equity for adult crime victims with disabilities.
Excellent, excellent. And so it seems through your work with the adult advocacy centers, you've had a career focus on advocacy for people with disabilities, especially on behalf of your son. And I know this time of year is right around the time when teams begin to develop IEPs for the next year. So can you talk a little bit more about just the role parent advocacy plays in helping to develop the IEP, but then also to strengthen the advocacy and self-determination of children with disabilities?
Right. So yes, this time of year is always a busy year, and I can say that I don't miss those IEP meetings at all.
I don't either.
And so it's been obviously some time since we haven't had to do that, but I would say that to other parents out there that you really need to sometimes step out of your comfort zone and educate yourself, really know what your child, your students' needs are, their challenges, their successes, because unfortunately, and with my experience, the school personnel, and we're talking about special education services, don't always know. Their job is to, look like they know, but they don't always really know. And so as a parent, it's really important to understand what your child's needs are. Come to the table with suggestions, and it takes a lot of time and research, but that's what I had to do, particularly when Justin was in elementary school, is seek out appropriate accommodations in terms of software and other things like that, and really advocate for those things. at the table. One other thing that I think that, at least in our experience and in speaking at the time with other parents, that's important is that it feels like oftentimes the IEP team, which is supposed to include the parents, but I think we all know that team, meaning all of the related special education services, they've all been working on this IEP. And oftentimes without your input, and then they present it to you. And as a parent, you should be getting that IEP, draft IEP, well in advance of the meeting, not sent home in the student's backpack the night before a meeting. And then you're supposed to be able to, provide that. And that's, kind of a simple thing to really advocate for, and it's okay, in my opinion, to say, I didn't get this IEP draft in enough time for me to read it, digest it, and be able to come to the table and talk about it. So, we need to reschedule this meeting. I think those kinds of things are really appropriate and important.
Yeah, I definitely understand the importance of advocating for yourself when it comes to accommodations. And it definitely seems like you and Justin sort of took the bull by the horns in terms of asking for, the things that you needed. Can you talk a little bit more about specific accommodations and services that you and Justin requested and how you supported him to have more assertiveness of his rights and to essentially make sure his voice was heard as he got older and prepared to transition out of high school?
You want me to, can I step in on this?
Sure.
You totally can. It is your podcast.
Yeah.
So, a couple of things in response to that. First of all, I think that sometimes I don't want to discourage anybody from advocating for themselves. It's obviously a very important thing to do, but I think I worry sometimes that when we have these conversations about advocacy, we're ignoring kind of the root problem. I don't think that the root problem is that there's disabled students who just aren't sticking up for themselves enough. I think most disabled students who are able to end up advocating for and knowing and being aware of what they need in the context of their education. I think the problem is that there's a lot of people who are trained to ignore those repeated requests, those repeated demands. So like yes, learning to advocate for oneself is important, and I'm really fortunate that I had parents, plural, who were willing to carve out that space for me as I got older. Because I think, the original consideration is, if you have a kid that's in second grade, you want them to enjoy being in second grade. There's this idea that, like, especially if IEP meetings get particularly contentious or create a lot of drama, you want the kid to be able to enjoy being the kid. So there's some tendency, I think, among parents, understandably, to kind of keep a screen up. But I think as situations become more difficult, as year after year you're asking for, like in my case, scanning math homework was a huge thing. So I can't hold a pencil to handwrite. And this was back in the era before every student had a laptop provided by the district. That's pretty standard depending on what district you're in now. But back then it was kind of relatively unheard of for somebody to do all of their work electronically. But when I think of just how much time it took it was, I would say, 8th grade before I had a math situation and a math software that I was fully comfortable with. At first, they were sticking me with a scribe. Then later on, we found sort of a math pad software that allowed me to put numbers into a grid, but then wasn't as good at manipulating shapes and doing geometry and that kind of stuff. So it was probably about 8th grade or so before I really felt like my IEP team was all on the same page and all on the side of me just doing something as basic as completing math homework. And yes, part of that is, me learning to become a stronger advocate, but part of that is also just the makeup of the IEP team changing, having teachers and support staff that are actually willing to, frankly, do their jobs, right? Make it so that I can access the content.
And we
I,
also develop our own relationships with them too, so that improves over time.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
No, I was just remarking that we also develop relationships with the members of our team too, so that they get a better sense of our abilities, and the relationship improves over time, and the willingness to accommodate, since they perhaps know more of what we're capable of. I think it is part of it as well.
And I think, unfortunately, when it's just the parent or guardian in the room, and I've seen this happen, not just in my own personal case, but in others' cases, when it's just the parent or guardian in the room, it's too easy for the IEP team to write things off as somebody exaggerating, being a squeaky wheel. Oh, they're probably fine. Like we're making mountains out of molehills here. It's harder, or one hopes it should be harder, to hear from somebody saying, hey, I'm just trying to do my math homework, or I'm just trying to be able to see the board in class if you have a visual impairment. It's harder to
Sorry.
deny that than it is to write off a parent. Obviously, like, we should listen to families when they first come in, and there's no reason why we shouldn't just listen in the first place. But I do think if you get into a situation where the family, the supports aren't being heard, there's a lot more pressure that gets created when somebody is willing and able to say, this is what I actually need.
And this is a good segue to my next point. When you were developing your IEP, did you have goals that were particularly important for you?
So, okay, here's my gripe with IEPs as they're currently constructed, right? Is that IEP goals are typically phrased as, here is what the student needs to do to be successful. That doesn't sound bad when you just say it in isolation like that. But what that ends up doing in practice, right, is it locates the problem inside the student. It locates the problem inside of the disabled person. I'll give you an example. I used to have an IEP goal, right? That was my backpack and my desk were horribly disorganized because I was getting 20,000 papers a day because nobody was scanning anything. So I had an IEP goal for a while there, not because mom or I requested it, but just because it kind of made its way there, that, Justin's going to keep his desk organized on 9 out of 10 trials or whatever, right? Rather than, here is what we will do as a school to digitize assignments in such a way that he can keep his desk organized. What I think in a lot of cases, what's actually needed in terms of documentation is, here is what we as teachers, as support staff, are going to do to create avenues of access from the student to the content, whether that's math or English or history or whatever. But how this gets phrased almost by default, especially if you have an IEP team that writes using IEP software, is, well, we need to phrase this as a thing that the student will do. So it takes problems with the student's education and places them on the student as if it's the student who's somehow deficient or not trying hard enough. I think what's important is almost less what's physically written on the paper. We had so many fights over wording for so many years, and more about, while you're at that meeting, if you're a disabled person, if you're family of a disabled person, being able to say to yourself, who knows what I need and appears to be willing to help me get it? and who do I need to work around? The IEP itself, I don't think was ever really particularly valuable to my education, unfortunately. The IEP meetings were, because they allowed me to identify, okay, this person, frankly, actually cares, and this person is somebody I'm going to need to figure out a way to get around. Now, obviously, if we would have gone to court, if we would have done any kind of legal proceeding, yes, it becomes important for the wording in that IEP to be super clear. But I think of all the fights we had over wording, and I wonder about, did that actually change the quality of the services that I was getting? Because the thing that actually changed that was people coming onto the IEP team that cared about me learning math or learning science or whatever the case may be. We could go back and forth 8,000 times on the wording or the particular goal, but the question was, what are you going to do as, a school staff, as an IEP team, to make sure that I can do my work? And I think one of the things that becomes difficult is, especially when you're a young child, you don't know the difference between challenging, like useful challenging, and difficult. You think school is supposed to be hard. So if it's hard for you to, um, as an example, in ninth grade, we annotated a book for the first time. We wrote notes in the margins and we annotated Frankenstein. And I didn't have a digital book then. So what I would have to do is I would have to hold Frankenstein open in one hand and type with one finger over here and literally type the page number and then type what I wanted to say. So I was up for 8, 9, 10 hours every night annotating Frankenstein, right? And I thought, okay, this is hard, but this is the first time we're annotating, like it's supposed to be hard. I think developing a sense of what is challenging and helpful versus what is just difficult for the sake of being difficult is hard as a disabled person. Like if I tied 2 hands behind your back and told you to make an omelet, like that would be difficult, but it wouldn't especially be challenging or helpful. So the question becomes, how do we as educators, as parents, create situations for our students that are usefully challenging, but not needlessly difficult? And I wish more IEP goals focused on that rather than here's everything that's wrong with your child, which is what the tone of these meetings can sometimes result in, right?
Absolutely. And we're getting toward the end of our time together, but I do want to give you a chance, Justin, to talk about your future career goals. My understanding is that you're becoming a teacher and finishing up a master's degree, which not a
Yeah,
lot of people have, regardless of having a disability. And one of the things I get most excited about is when people with disabilities have the supports to pursue meaningful careers that meet their interests and abilities and passions. And it really sounds like you're doing all of that. Can you talk about just your future goals, why you're becoming a teacher, maybe what advice you would give to young students seeking accommodations, and maybe what your favorite part of being a teacher is?
yeah, absolutely. So I think there are kind of 2 things that fuel me as a teacher and that made me want to be a teacher. One is like genuine joy, right? Like I really enjoy figuring out the thoughts that are in a person's head. I really enjoy figuring out how they solve a difficult problem or what they think about an interesting book. And I especially enjoy doing that with groups of people, LGBT students, disabled students, students of color that haven't necessarily been given the room or the space to be listened to or think that their thoughts are worth sharing, right? That's a really interesting challenge to me. Is I don't think we have a school system, frankly, even if you're able-bodied, that values the input of students all that much. So I try to create a classroom where maybe that isn't the case, where maybe for the first time you see somebody who's genuinely interested in what you have to say. Um, and I'm also motivated on sort of the other end of things by a lot of anger. There's a lot of people who are in education and who have power in education who just frankly should not be in education. Um, Either because they came into it for good reason and then over time they got cynical and calculating and, oh, this is what we have to do, this is our tradition, or because I do believe there's a small minority of people who genuinely enjoy having power over others, who genuinely enjoy keeping people from getting what they need and feeling good about themselves. And unfortunately, some of those people are in education. So I am excited for the chance to create something, to help create something that is, actually worth attending, that people look forward to coming to, where, everybody can um see a side of themselves that maybe they didn't know they had. I could easily go into private school, and a lot of my friends and a lot of people that I really respect do that. But the reason why I'm a public educator specifically is I like the idea of working in a system where you get to take everybody. You get to take the people who a lot of these systems have rejected or overlooked, and you get to be able to see, what can we do together? What can we do together that's fun and rewarding and allows you to see yourself in roles that you haven't seen yourself in before? Like, I have a whole laundry list of people, and I think every disabled person has this, of people who really stuck their neck out for me when nobody else was doing it. And I also have a whole laundry list of people of, people who made my life very difficult for seemingly no reason. And like, I know what list I want to be on for somebody else, right? So that's kind of what empowers me, I feel like. And that's why I'm excited, no matter where I land in terms of middle school, high school, to help create these experiences for people.
So Jackie, what are some of the resources you recommend that parents look into when they're working to transition their young students with disabilities to possibly think about a post-secondary education or meaningful employment beyond high school?
Mhm. So the transition from high school and beyond, yeah, there are resources out there, and I think that Disability Rights Ohio has always had a lot of resources available in terms of what the rights are, and honestly, I think that going back to when I talked about really educating yourself as a parent or as a person with a disability, um, is very important. And um, and really talking with, like, in terms of Justin transitioning to college, colleges have a disability services office generally. And again, those aren't always going to be your friend, and they may not always know what the appropriate accommodation is, but you have to have that relationship. You can't go into it without having that relationship with them. And a lot of it really has to do with just common sense, when Justin talked about that with accommodations, whether it's in high school, whether it's in college, whether it's in the, employment sphere, it it's about leveling the playing field, really. And that was always kind of my overall umbrella, is how do we level this playing field for Justin to be successful? So there are, like I said, there are resources out there. There's so many people involved in a person with a disability's life as they, are provided services, the county boards, OOD. And, you have to use those. Sometimes they are barriers, quite frankly. But you have to understand how that works and that they are going to be at some level involved in allowing the person to be as successful as they can be.
And how does it feel for you as the parent? You've climbed this mountain over 18 plus years, and now you see your son on the cusp of a successful career as a teacher. How does that make you feel in terms of what you've accomplished?
Right. I'm so proud of Justin. His dad and I are, of course, and really always have been. But I can also say that sometimes I'm still angry at that so many of these issues that we encountered when he was in elementary school are still there in terms of just the common sense part of it, allowing for particular accommodations. And I guess I have to say that at the very last IEP meeting that Justin had before he graduated from high school, the district service coordinator at the end of the meeting, when most everyone was gone, said to me, and I know that he said this trying to compliment me, but he said, Jackie, you have done such a great job. You've stuck in there all along for Justin, and look at now he's going off to Kenyon College and going to live on campus, and kudos to you. And honestly, I just wanted to say, then why did you give us such a hard time for 15 years? I mean, so I had some anger for a while about that, of like, why did you do that? But that's going to be life. That's a life lesson, that there will be those people who will always, for whatever reasons, and there's a lot of reasons for why school districts give parents kind of a tough time to go. But I think that if, as parents going through these IEP processes, if you can just always remember that this is for your child, that your fight is for your child, and that you have every right to do that fight. And it's a fine line between being, aggressive and direct and nice. I kind of gave up that nice thing, again, to just make sure that there is a level playing field for your child. And I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, we succeeded, at that, because there were a lot of things that we didn't succeed at, but you have to keep doing it. And one other really quick thing, Nathan, a tip for parents going into IEP meetings is always bring someone with you, because as a parent, you feel like you're sitting around that table with 10 school people, school personnel, and you're all by yourself. And there's a real us against versus them, and just have someone who can be your support person. It kind of psychologically helps you when you have to, pull every ounce of confidence that you have to say, no, you're wrong, or no, that's not the way we want to go. Just to have somebody else there with you is always a good thing.
Yeah, and Ohio is a one-party consent recording state. Ask me how I know. I would absolutely encourage, definitely in writing, but also, on your phone app, to record every single IEP meeting. Because even if you're alone in that room, then if you do have to go down that road where you're bringing in other people eventually, you want a paper trail.
Well, we're about at the end of our time for today, but I do want to thank Jackie and Justin Martin for joining us today on IEP Talks. We've had a fascinating discussion about advocacy around the individualized education plans. And I also want to remind you all, our listeners, to share your stories with us. If you had an issue with your IEP or you want to give us suggestions for future podcasts, we would greatly appreciate you reaching out to us on our social channels. And thank you again for listening. And I hope you all have a great day. Thank you. Bye bye.